name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Bill Hendrix, retired VP of Technology at Valent USA. This week, our conversation is about accessibility at Comcast, gender-neutral awards categories, weight discrimination protection, and more. Bill, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Enjoy being able to attend your podcast. So, as you said, I'm Bill Hendrix, he, him pronouns, and I do come from a little bit of a different background from some of your other speakers. I'm trained as an entomologist, and I've worked in the ag industry for 34 years now. So, as you may know, it's often an area that can be behind the general population as far as accepting of DE&I, unfortunately. So, anyhow, I started working in DE&I back when I was at the University of Arkansas, working on my master's student, and tried to start the first LGBTQ group in 1982 with a lesbian friend of mine. So let's just say the university wasn't very accepting at that particular time and tried to fire me, actually. So it really blew up, and the whole thing went to the state legislature where they tried to pass a bill called Stem the Tide of Homosexuality. And it just continued to grow, and eventually the ACLU got involved, and obviously I kind of graduated after things settled down a little bit. So
Wow, that
yeah,
is a heck of a story. The ACLU got involved, and
long
wow,
time ago. Yeah, and then
that's amazing. Well, thank you for being a pioneer, Bill.
I don't know about that, but yeah. And after getting my PhD, went on to work for a major ag chemical company, and they strongly committed to their D&I journey in 2000. Ended up leading the LGBT group there for the ag division, and then took over globally for them and ran it for about 6 years. And it was really interesting because they had made a lot of changes in the culture in the work site, but what they were finding was people didn't feel comfortable at night when they went home. Once they left the gates, they had more protection inside the work gates than they did outside. And so they decided to start getting active in diversity and inclusion in the communities as well, which I thought was really great and a major breakthrough. And it actually led me to testifying before Congress twice as well on
Wow.
LGBTQ issues in the workplace. So hopefully made some changes. And then, as you mentioned, I worked for Valent, recently retired from them, where I was vice president of technology. Ran their R&D operations and things like that. But they've contracted me back now to work on their DE&I, a little smaller company, newer on their journey. So about 4 years or so now on the DE&I journey. But I kind of oversee the ERGs, or employee resource groups, put out a newsletter every month, minute slides, which I love. You can start a meeting with one little slide, takes a second, and all sorts of D&I stuff for them that I really enjoy. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's great. Testifying before Congress about LGBTQ inclusion, was that Pre-Equality Act? Was that the
Yeah,
Employment Non-Discrimination Act? Okay.
that was when I'm actually testified in 2008 for the first transgender hearing at the House of Representatives. And I was asked there, it was Dow Chemical, I was asked to talk about why a company like Dow, which was a Midwestern brick and mortar company, would be supportive of transgender rights. Of course, that was easy to talk about in many ways, but also really difficult at that time. I mean, it was the first time they'd had a hearing about that. And so, a lot of people in Congress really didn't understand, I think, what all of that
Yeah.
meant at the time. So,
Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you for all you've done and all you continue to do to pave the way, because you know what? Here in the US, for folks who aren't aware, here in the US, we only recently have federal protections against employment discrimination thanks to a Supreme Court ruling 3 years ago. But we do not have federal protections against discrimination in housing and public accommodations. And we've seen a lot of proactive legislation this year and in the past few years, which actually makes it more difficult for LGBTQ people to be safe in the world. So thank you for all you've done. And for everyone who's out there fighting for equality, we really appreciate this. So, Bill, I have a random question for you.
All right.
Has anyone ever made an assumption that you're straight?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Especially working in agriculture. I mean, I think that is the given assumption. Um, my husband and I just celebrated 42 years, by the way,
Oh,
and
wow.
he
Congratulations.
thanks. But he always jokes, they'll make the assumption I'm straight unless he's in the room with me, and then it's kind of a lot more obvious. But yeah, especially again because of agriculture and working in a lot of areas that maybe they're not used to thinking about somebody being LGBTQ.
And it can be kind of awkward, right? To correct
Oh yeah.
someone, or the person might be kind of embarrassed after you correct them, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of those things where, as an LGBTQ person, you have to decide every time. Is it worth coming out? Is this the right time? And sometimes even your own safety and stuff like that. But yeah, I try and generally make it casual, and
Mhm.
if I can do it with a joke or something like that, that makes it even better. But a lot of times it's pretty straightforward and simple. Like they'll say, how's your wife or something like that. I go, no, my husband's doing great. Thanks so much for asking. And
Yeah.
just keep right on going. Don't make a big
Yeah,
deal out
that's
of
the
it.
way to do it.
No.
Exactly. Well, the reason I ask that is because last week I was at an event where there was a panel on allyship, and at the Q&A portion, someone with a disability spoke up and said, "Enthusiastic allies, please do not practice benevolent ableism by giving us what you think we need without first asking what it is we actually need," which means
Mhm.
that these benevolent allies making assumptions, right? And I've had lots of assumptions made about me in the past. And the reality what we should be doing instead is to ask folks what they need. And I've spoken at Valent before. You brought me in to speak a couple years ago.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I talk about in my speech is called the ARC method, which is ask, respect, connect. We'll put that in the show notes so you can get a handle on what it is. But really, it's about asking from a place of curiosity, not confrontation, respecting what it is you hear, and not interrupting, not dismissing, and then connecting to sort of wrap it all up and fulfill the promise. That could mean that you're paraphrasing, you're validating. But anyway, it's an antidote to these mistaken assumptions. So I just wanted to make sure people had that tool because it is very easy, very practical. And I even have a little song about it, as you know, Bill.
Love this song. No, and I love the art method. It is, on the one hand, a simple concept, but on the other, really breakthrough, because I think a lot of people are afraid of the confrontation, like you were saying before. And this is a very easy way to engage with somebody and to find out more about them. And I think, like you said, if you come at it from an open and empathetic way, people are very open to that, and we shouldn't make assumptions. So it's a great way to make sure we don't.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So let's get into this week's good vibes. The first story this week comes from New York City, which has a new law against height and weight discrimination, providing a significant step in protecting higher weight individuals from workplace bias. It's a unique law in the US. It's not just about employment, but also housing and public spaces. Amazing.
I think it is such a breakthrough, but it's again on our journey as a country or as a world population. I think it's a logical step. It's a great thing to have. Not surprising, it's New York, and I saw some of the other cities that are either passing or considering it. So some of the more forward-thinking cities, and I think it's great. Wherever possible, we should try and accommodate as many people as possible. Something that's not related to the core work uh, job at hand shouldn't interfere. In the statistics about if you're overweight, and how it can leave you behind on promotions or pay raises and things like that are pretty startling. So, anything to overcome that is, I think, very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. There was a few years ago, the Harvard, whatever the department is at Harvard that studies and administers the implicit association test, discovered that bias against sexual orientation, race, and gender, all of that is going down. Bias against age and size are not. So those two seem to be among the final frontiers of bias.
hmm And age, I think you bring up another good one in particular, although that article didn't directly address that. But, it's definitely easy to make assumptions. And for the newsletter I'm putting out for the company, the article was around Gen Z and sort of boomer, the old joke
Hmm.
about boomers and the assumptions we make. But, it's true. And I think, again, back to your arc, we can ask questions, get the information directly from them, and see how they'd like to be supported in the workplace.
Exactly. All right. The second story comes from here in Chicago, where Northwestern University made history as incarcerated students graduated with bachelor's degrees, a first for a top 10 U.S. university. So these students were part of the Northwestern Prison Education Program, which pushed through the COVID epidemic with limited resources. And these students are graduates. Pretty amazing story here. Great partnership.
I thought so. And from such a well-respected university like that too. Hopefully that'll
Hmm.
open it up for a lot more. The inequity that exists in our prison systems, and a lot of things to overcome when you come from a background where you had incarceration, that may show up on your job up, as you apply for jobs, and they do background checks and everything. So what a great way to help overcome some of that, I think, and give them a chance to fully engage in society, which is really, really important.
Equity in action, right?
Yeah, it's
All right.
amazing.
Third story this week is about sensitive Santas. This holiday season, over 300 malls across the U.S. are hosting Caring Santa and Sensitive Santa events, catering specifically to children with disabilities. So these events provide a sensory friendly environment where Santa and staff are trained to support these kids outside of regular hours with reduced lighting and music, requiring reservations to minimize crowds. So things that are really giving kids on the autism spectrum in particular a chance to enjoy the Santa experience in a less stimulating environment. And it can be a very stimulating environment otherwise.
Well, I don't have children, but I've certainly been at the mall this time of the year, and it's such a crazy environment. You hear the kids screaming, and there's a long line. So I love the idea. They make appointments. There's less music. There's less light to reduce all of that stimuli that could be overwhelming. I mean, again, just what a great way to think about who you want to attract into your mall or your workplace or whatever, and then trying
Hmm.
to see what it is that they need and react to that. And I bet there are a lot of parents who would wish they could make appointments, for instance, to Santa, instead of waiting in that awful line to get their
Yeah,
pictures made. So, but especially to take some of those other environmental cues and react to that and reduce the stress.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think the joy of the Santa experience should be accessible to everyone.
Every kid that wants it should be able to have that. That's for sure. So.
That's right. Okay, the fourth story this week comes from the Soul Train Music Awards, where Janelle Monáe, who I happen to absolutely love,
Yeah.
was a winner. And Soul Train transformed their Lady of Soul Award into the gender neutral Spirit of Soul Award, recognizing Janelle as a non binary artist. So it's a slow trend. The Grammys do it, but none of the other major award ceremonies do it. In fact, there were two non-binary actors up who both won Tony Awards this year, who were in the male category, the men's category, even though they identify as non-binary. So it's pretty significant that the Soul Train Awards have made this step.
Totally agree. just shows even industries that you think ought to be more progressive are on their journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, back to the Tonys, I think their decision was they'd be nominated in the category that their character represented, but in Some Like It Hot, they ended up representing, both male and female. So I don't even know how they came up with some of the, how they decided. So, yeah, in many ways, it's just a better way to go, right? A
Mm-hmm.
non-gender specific. I loved it. The spirit of, I think, is what they renamed the award, and that I think is probably actually closer to what they were trying to highlight and to honor, anyhow, right? So it doesn't matter what the gender
Exactly.
was so much. Yeah. So great progress finally.
Exactly.
And by the way, let me comment if I could. Just the diversity of the articles you put out every week, so great. Uh, I really enjoyed reading, and then when I got to this one in particular, because I love going to the plays and seeing shows on Broadway, it was really great. Talk about a stereotype, but anyhow, that's me and my background. So I really enjoyed reading about that article in particular. But
Thanks, Bill. Okay, the last story this week comes from Comcast, which is breaking barriers in its Philadelphia stores, specifically by providing live American Sign Language interpreting services. So this week, so the way this works is that someone who needs American Sign Language services can go into the Philly stores. The reps will utilize ASL video remote interpreting, VRI, to access a live interpreter provided by a partner. So when 3.6% of the population is deaf or hard of hearing, this can be significant.
And if my memory is correct, because I took some sign language classes, it's the fourth most common language in the U.S. It has its own culture. My thought when I was reading this is, why so long? What a
Yep.
perfect fit for the technology. Why did it take so long? But kudos, it was their CEO, I think, that came up with the idea of doing this. And back to our discussion about employee resource groups and BRG's business resource group. What a great way for that community, hopefully, to engage that company and give them a competitive edge. That's great. So, what a
I
great
think
idea.
that's such a great point, Bill. I
Yeah.
mean, this is a fantastic way to leverage a disabilities resource group in towards a business objective, right? I
Hmm.
mean, it's sort of creating a win-win where these employees are going to be more engaged, they're going to have a stronger sense of purpose, and of course, it's a better customer experience.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine if I was of that community and came in, and to be able to do that and commute in my native language that way. I
Yes,
mean, of course, I'm going to have a much better experience. So,
exactly.
mm.
Exactly. All right. Well, this week's call to action is a TED Talk, which we'll put in the show notes, on uncovering talent, the power of authenticity. It's a TEDx talk by Kenji Yoshino, who is a professor at NYU School of Law. So we'll share that in the show notes. Bill, you've been an amazing guest. I've really enjoyed hearing about your background and connecting with you and having your stories resonate with our folks. Can you tell people how they can keep in touch with you?
Sure. LinkedIn is probably the easiest way, and I know in your invite you had the link there. So, love to make connections that way, and for sure. But particularly if anybody's in the ag industry and wants to connect, I'm always open. But more generally in D&I as well. So, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a real delight. It really has, Bill. I hope that you have a great week and that everyone else has a great week. And if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a great week.